Hi guys, welcome to the channel and welcome to this deep dive into the Armstrong HA range, brand new for 2024. I'm going to do something a little bit different here, not going to do your standard review. What we're going to do is dissect each discipline and identify which foil is going to be best for you. Hopefully we're going to save you some time, a heap of money, and get you on the right foil, having as much fun as possible. So let's get straight into it. Oh, before we do, a little bit of a bonus at the end. I'm going to talk about the perfect tail, shim, fuselage combination. So stick around at the end and you'll get that gem as well. Okay, before we dive into it, I want to tell you that my motivation for doing this is about raising as much money as possible for Bear Cottage, a children's hospice based here in Sydney. In my day job, I work really closely with them on a day-to-day basis, and I see the amazing work they do, not only for the kids, but for the families as well. It's vital that we support these community organisations, and you can do so by liking and subscribing to the channel. Every single penny that this channel generates is going directly to the charity. You can also donate directly via the link that I put in the description below. Please dig deep, guys, it really does make a difference. All right, let's get straight into it. Okay, as a general overview, I would describe these wings as being next generation. And what I mean by that is that the profile and the shape is very complex. That lends itself to having a really good low end at the same time as having a good top end. They've just extended the speed range whilst allowing it to turn really well at the same time, which is something that we've not seen before with high aspect wings. The holy grail of any hydrofoil is something that can go really fast to keep up with big swells, can go slow so that it's got a really low stall speed, which means you can get a smaller wing, be able to pump really well so you can connect waves, glide so that you can keep up with the rolling swell and just glide effortlessly, and then obviously to be able to turn as well. Now that foil just doesn't exist. I certainly haven't come across one yet. So you have to compromise somewhere, and where the HA foils have compromised is that high top end. So they're not the fastest foils I've ever used, but they're not designed to be able to do that. Now that being said, if you pair the right tail and the right shim with these foils, they do keep up with the rolling swells. And that's something that I'll talk about a little bit later on. Before we get into the disciplines itself, I want to give you my DIMs so that you can compare. So I'm about 80 kilos, give or take, depending on how to poo. My preference is very much waves. I do a little bit of racing as well, and I loved Downwind. So there's a little bit of background, so hopefully you can compare as and when. Okay, so which foil should you get for prone foiling? For me, it's all about the 780, the 880, and the 980. The 780 is all about when it's critical, when the waves are bigger, when there's a little bit more energy there, and you want to go faster. It turns really well. I can still pump it for a long time, but where it comes into its own is that ability to be able to breach wingtips by mistake, turn. It's just forgiving, and it's very controllable, and that's what I want when there's a lot of energy going around. The 880, well, that's my daily driver. That's what I go out in pretty much everything. It really does do everything very well. Obviously, the smaller and the larger foils are going to be a little bit more niche, but for me, if I had one foil to go proning for, if I was going on a trip, I'd take the 880. The 980 for me is when it's small. When there's a little wave there, that's when I'm going to be connecting wave after wave. It still turns really well, but I can pump that thing forever. It's a really, really good foil to be able to connect, pump, and glide. The one foil that I do want to talk about is the biggest one in the range, which is the 1180. Look, I think you could learn to prone foil or surf foil on the 1180. And what it's going to give you is that gratification of pumping and connecting sooner than anything else that I've seen. Okay, downwinding. Now, this wasn't on my radar initially, but they are incredibly good at downwinding, but particularly the bigger sizes. So for me, the 1180 and the 1080 are my go-to for downwinding. All right, so we've got up to the wind line. I don't know if you can see, but it's actually really light. It's dropped off from when I started, and This is what I love about this foil, is that it allows me to paddle up when the conditions change. All right, let's send it. All right, so probably up and going now, a bit out of breath. I'm having to cut pretty hard because of the conditions, but oh, this foil is such a dream. And actually on the smaller board, I feel like that's when it comes alive. Just really, I don't know, I just feel like I can go forever. Heart rate dependent, obviously, but yeah, it's really user friendly, as I said. That's the theme of this. Right, let's see if I can get over the top of this. There we go. So, as I mentioned earlier, absolute cut fest, having to cut massively. But this wing just allows you to turn that other wings of similar lift don't. And that's so important in cutting, like I'm doing right now. Get my bearings, try and find another bit of swell as I'm pumping, basically across the swell line. There's one, it's a little bit ahead. And there you go, tapping into this big one as well. See that? The 1180, I think, is the perfect step down from the APF foil. So if you are beginning your downwind journey, I would recommend going to the APF. The 1675 is what I used. And then I did the progression down to the 1180, and it wasn't too much of a jump. It was much less than I expected it to be. It gets up really quickly with the low stall speed, but with the right tail, it does keep up with the rolling swells, which is great. I have, by accident, used the 880, and I was in a rush and I picked up the wrong foil at home, and it's all I had, so I gave it a go. And it took me forever to get up, so I wouldn't recommend the smaller sizes. In fact, the only reason I did get up was because a dorsal fin popped up and started doing circles around me. Needless to say, I myself, and I think the extra adrenaline allowed me to get up on the foil, and I just pumped the whole way home. So yeah, as a bit of advice, I'd say probably not the lower sizes. Once you start getting smaller, you'd probably want to go over to the downwind specific foils. But for downwinding, absolutely 1180, 1080, amazing. Okay, sup surfing, very similar story to downwinding. In fact, exactly the same, 1180, 1080. I have experimented with the smaller sizes, but I found you just sacrifice pump to be able to connect waves. So I really like the 1180 and the 1080, and that's condition dependent for me. Okay, winging, my favorite of all the disciplines. Now, there's a little bit of a gap in between the topper end and the lower end of the foils, which I tend not to use, and I'll go to the MA instead. When it's super light conditions and I'm using a sup board to wing and I want to use a smaller wing itself, then I will go for the 1180 with a smaller tail. That gets me up in next to nothing, but it's still playful. I can still mess around in waves and have a great time. I then will jump down to the 780, and that's the largest wing that I will use when there is any type of breeze around. So when I'm talking about 10 knots more is when I'll start jumping on the 780. It sounds really small, but the speed range is really big for these foils, and it can get up in next to nothing. If I am on anything less than a 5 meter, then I'll start going down to the 680. Again, it blows my mind how versatile that wing is. When it's absolutely nuking, again, I'll probably jump down to the MAs. But yeah, for me, winging, really my go-to is the 780. Massive speed range, it's fast enough, it turns well, and it's controllable. Really enjoy that wing. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk about towing. And for me, that's all about the smaller sizes. So really, it's the 580 and the 680. The only time I'd use the 780 is if the waves were slightly smaller and I want to be able to connect a few and just get a toe in and then do my own connections. Otherwise, I would very much focus on the smaller sizes. Okay, as promised, before we get to the end, Billy bonus, tails, shims and fuse lengths. So for the bigger sizes, the 1180, the 1080, for me, it's all about the speed of 180. Now, for some reason, that tail doesn't like to be shimmed. I found it that it just bog standard out the box, slap it on, that tends to work really well. I have played around with smaller tails with the bigger sizes, and I just found it wanting in terms of pitch control. So the extra lift, I think, with the Speed 180 really does pair nicely. The smaller sizes, the 880 and the 780, for me, it's all about the Dart 140, and I smack a blue shim on that. I find that really unlocks them. It really increases the top end and allows you to pump and glide forever. When I start going down onto the smaller sizes, or indeed I've got more power and I want to go faster, then I'll start thinking about putting the red shim in and really reducing that angle of attack and allowing it to go slightly faster. Obviously, the sacrifice of that is that pitch control. In terms of fuse, really the go-to for me is the 60 centimeter fuse. I have played around with the 70, particularly when I'm going really fast, I'm doing speed runs, and I want to have the smallest tail possible with a red shim. That seems to work quite nicely, but as a general rule, the 60 centimeter fuse tends to work really well with that combo. Okay, I hope you found that useful. I hope you've got something out of it. If at nothing else, I hope it saved you a bit of time and a bit of money. Like with always, guys, please subscribe to the channel. As I mentioned, it helps generate a revenue for Bear Cottage. All right, let's wrap it up there, and I'll see you on the water again soon.